Welcome back, everyone, to Stop, Drop, and Roll. I'm Jen Caceres, your host, and today I have a guest with me, Valerie Probstfeld, who I've been friends with. Valerie, how long have we known each other now?
It's been at least like 18 months or so now, almost 2 years.
I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, LinkedIn is great for connecting people for all things, and we actually got to meet in person, which was pretty exciting.
We met 2 years ago or so, but we realized we had so much in common just going way back, and life finally had us meet each other in person. I feel like we had this intertwining history throughout where we lived and just our stories. So it's so cool.
Yeah, and I've been watching you go from content creation and coming from your background in nurse practitioner, and now you've just written a book. So we're going to get into Stop, Drop, and Roll is really about using a process to pause and just gain clarity on things. And so I'd like to tap into some of that today as we go through your history and where you're headed. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much again, Jen, for having me. I absolutely love your podcast. And I love the concept of stop, drop, and roll. And I love this pausing. I had a paradigm shift when I decided to take that pause and that mindful shift or that perspective. And I start my story a lot of the time with I thought I was going to be this A+ mom. I thought, growing up, I wanted to be a different mom where I did not see or I did not have an angry face. I did not have yelling because that's what I experienced growing up. There was a lot of angry faces, there was a lot of yelling, and I didn't know why. And so I was like, I'm going to be a different mom. That also led me to study pediatrics. I've always loved working with kids and with families. And I first started out in music. I've always been a flutist, a flute player. I had that as a calling, but also I felt like there was something more that I needed in my life where I was called to. And I really just loved learning about the brain and the body and how our mind and our body works. So I studied pediatrics. I became a nurse practitioner, worked in pediatric neurology, and I thought that I was completely well prepared for motherhood. I have this Ivy League education. I was going to rock everything about it because I have all this experience in pediatrics and I know how the family should be and the attachment theories and all of that. All of that to say, Jen, within 10 minutes of my baby being born, she went to the NICU and I didn't study for that. I didn't plan for that. And I had emotions that I had not at all thought I was going to experience that were far from perfect. I was so frustrated. I was so anxious and angry that I couldn't see my baby. Like it was just so much. And it brought this shame that I didn't know that I could experience where I just remember like looking at the whiteboard when you deliver your baby, you have a whiteboard to the side of you. And there was this whole exciting message because she was in due. We were planning for it. Said, welcome, baby. Just a little picture. I remember looking at it, it being smeared, crossed off, and the new room number of the NICU. Not that it was crossed off, but it was just like,
Yeah.
just this quick, like so many voices, people, so many noises. And I had no idea what was going on. And all that to say, I think for a long time, that first year, I was feeling so kind of like I was not what I thought I was going to be. I did a lot of writing, a lot of journaling at that time. One of the first things that I wrote while I was still in the NICU was that the staff, it was interesting. They all called me Valerie before my baby was born. But as soon as my baby was born, my name changed to mom. I was like, wow, I love the name mom. I wanted to be a mom for my whole life. And it's a beautiful name. But at the same time, it's not my only name, but it's almost like there was this birth certificate that, we fill out for our babies, but we have one as well. And it truly is this rebirth almost in a sense. So I wrote about this new name that I have and all the expectations, this perfect expectation that I thought I was going to be as mom. And I looked up in the dictionary because I really love the etymology of words. And I looked that up. So, what is mom? What does mom mean? And it was interesting because Merriam Webster defines mom as both a noun, a title, as well as a verb. And I didn't know about the verb mom, to mother, to mom. Merriam Webster defines as to give birth, allow one to rise, care for, or protect. And if you think about like what gives birth, allows one to rise, care for, or protect, and that's love. I mean, love does those things. And that is something I can control because I think that illusion of control was quickly washed away. But I can control that verb. I can control choosing love in this moment over fear. And that brings me back to that pause that we were talking about earlier. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, a famous psychologist, says between stimulus and response, there is a space. And within that space lies our ability to choose, which allows for our growth and our freedom. I know that's not necessarily exactly how he said it, but essentially that is a very eye opening quote of this space. Because when I am reacting, as opposed to responding, I'm using the fight flight part of my brain. I'm not thinking as logically, but when I am responding, I'm able to bring myself back into the moment. And how can I lengthen that space? That's a long winded answer to your question, Jen, but that was something that I very much felt like was the paradigm shift of why I decided to do what I wanted to do. That was the start of it, I would say. And how can I live my verb more also by lengthening that space? I feel like some days are easier than others, some hours are easier than others. And when my baby, when she was 2, she said, "Mom, I hate your angry face." And I remember thinking like, "But I had my mom's angry face. What the heck?
Mhm.
Surely I'm not as bad as my mom was." Like, what? And so I actually, being a flute player, I
Mhm.
remember we had a nanny. It was first time mom, first time nanny. We had a camera running and
Mm.
I forgot to turn it off that day. And I remember I'm like, I scolded my daughter for something earlier. I don't remember what it was, but I remember I did kind of yell, let me assess my performance. And I
Mm.
watched it, Jen, and I was exactly like my mom. It almost was like there was no difference. I know it was in my head, but on the outside, all I saw on that camera was an angry face. And I was like, you know what? I am not. I need to do more. I really then decided to make myself my own patient and to make a
Mhm.
diary of how do I lengthen the space more? How do I take mental back roads? And almost in
Mhm.
real life, practicing gratitude, mindfulness, kindness, not only to others, but to myself, smiling more as opposed to having an angry face. And so a lot of like my writing and my work has been doing it myself and then seeing what works and what doesn't and giving myself that grace. So that's kind of what I'm all about there.
I love that because I work a lot with organizations and with leaders of teams. And so, in my mind, as you're talking, I'm seeing myself apply that to my family and kids as well. But I'm hopeful that listeners are not only just taking that as a personal thing, but also how we work with others too. Because thinking about that, it made me think of a person that I used to report to who had that angry face, who would show up. And then you go on, and it's just like you said with your own child. We kind of do that with our teams. If we oversee teams, sometimes we'll care for them or nurture them just like as if they're our own children. But we show up with that angry face. We're like, that's not us. That's the boss that I used to report to, or that's my mom or my dad or grandparents. So I love that you've taken that and just applied it to yourself first, because I think that really flows into this reflection where you had that video and you were like, okay, I'm going to look at my performance. And you're like, holy cow, who is this person? Right. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Right. Absolutely. I feel like my performance background to be able to even think about doing that, because I don't think otherwise I would have been able to even wrap my head around how do I assess my performance. It was
Mhm.
just so eye opening. And it was something that I feel like we should do more in life is to assess that because I think we really do feel justified in our head for whatever it is, which is fine. There is that perspective of why I'm yelling because we're late or whatever that is. There is that why. But at the same time, to the observer, they don't know. They aren't inside your head. They don't know. And it is a lot of that body language that I remember one time I was so frustrated at some guy. I didn't know him, but he yelling at me because I parked in an area that he didn't like. It was fine, but he didn't like it. And I remember just being like, "Sir, have you tried mindfulness?" Where I'm like, I have all this knowledge in my brain about mindfulness, but here I am meeting him at his energy level, and it's
Mm.
just different. It is bringing it back to those simple things, that the simplicity of how powerful these simple things are. And, like this gratitude, mindfulness, smiling, and body language, all these things, I think we say, oh, that's kind of fluff, but I think that is the basis for communication, for really so much of how society works, for leadership and whatever else there is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's hilarious. I wonder if you could have thrown like a business card at him. Listen to mental backgrounds and highways.
If I had one at the time, I probably would have. And he was just, I am not interested in mindfulness right now.
You know what the funniest part about that is? If you hadn't had that upbringing, you wouldn't have known to look for that. It really does tap into, I always go refer to it as the backpack of life. It's all that stuff that we experience. We carry it around with us. We don't realize when we're tapping into it and ask, who are you bringing to work with you? Who are you bringing to your child's basketball game with you? If you're the parent yelling and screaming, there might be
Yeah,
something you're bringing. So it's just really neat the way that overlaps.
absolutely. I love that analogy of the backpack. I think that's spot on with so many things in life.
Right. In reflecting, and I do have some questions here, so I may just read a couple questions off because you do have a brand new book. So tell us about that real quick, and then I'll get into maybe some more questions.
Thank you so much. I have my new book came out in May of 2025. It's called Two Mamas to Love: Pioneering a New Kind of Motherhood. It was so fun, but also such a challenge to write, in the sense I made myself my own study, but in a way that was relatable to other moms, to the reader, because I felt like I was alone when I was new in motherhood. And I didn't really feel like all these thoughts that I had I could share because of all the shame of, I'm not a perfect mom. I'm not what I thought I was going to be. And I really wanted to be with the reader, but also have the neuroscience knowledge that I have to know that we're not broken. And I think for the longest time, in our generation of education, there's this pass fail model. And Carol Dweck with the growth mindset, I think, is such a game changer. And I'm glad I'm seeing that more in school, the power of yet and all of that. I think that for early on in motherhood, I felt like I was a failure because I was yelling or I was being too anxious. I think if I knew that it was okay to not be perfect, to know that when I look outside, when I take a walk outside, it's the fall right now, that the fall leaves are the oranges and the yellows, those are from decreased light. They're from darkness. There's so much in nature that shows us that imperfection is what life is. And we're always growing. We're always learning. So that was a big part of not only the motivation to write my book, but also what I wanted to convey to the reader. So I broke it up into three sections, as far as, kind of understanding the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex of the brain, but kind of making it more simple. And also talking about my why, what a little bit about my childhood and the stories behind that. And then really after that, it's all about mental backroads and highways of how can we choose gratitude in the moment, choose mindfulness, and then having exercises throughout the chapters. So it's been a journey. And I will say, Jen, just in transparency, if anyone is thinking about writing a book or they're already writing a book, there were some times that it was hard to even know what to write. I would take a break for a couple of months, or sometimes I was profusely writing. It took about 5 years to do. And towards the end, there was something that washed over me of complete anxiety and like just a, oh my gosh, like this is about to be ready. And I am so scared to actually press go, essentially. And it was my baby that was now 9 that had to push me towards the end of being like, Mom, you were writing this book. You're right now in the dip. You just need to get through it. I knew she was watching. And I'm so thankful that she pushed me towards the end to get there, as well as I ran a half marathon right before I published the book. And I don't run them very often. I didn't train well for them. And I don't recommend running a half marathon and not training. But I apparently thought that was a fun idea at the time. But all to say that I remember at the 5 mile mark, I was done. And there were cheerleaders on the sidelines saying, "You can do this." And I remember thinking, no, I can't do it. I'm not even halfway done. How do they not know this? I'm like, not done. But I took one step in front of the other and I kept doing it because I had cheerleaders. So I think that is just so important, not only for writing a book, but for anything in life and these with these goals that are worth attaining. So I wanted to put that in there as well because I think that you can do it, whatever it is that you put your mind to. It just sometimes we have to look to our cheerleaders when we're doubting ourselves in those moments.
Thank you so much for sharing that because not that it's a relief, but it's almost nice to hear that it took so long for you to write your book. I'm trying not to be selfish in this moment, just very publicly saying that because, it's one of those things where you have to go back. I mean, you were putting yourself back in the delivery room. You were bringing all of those emotions back to yourself. And then maybe, I don't know if this is true, but, I'm also working on a book and it's like, as you are writing, you are beating yourself up and you're shooting on yourself. We talk about that a lot. And then you start comparing yourself. So I love the fact that you just put that out there for everybody who's listening to just go, I can't compare myself to anybody else. You had to go through it. And there's no rules about how long it takes for you to do that or anything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of times with social media, like we see the finished project, we see, oh, I wrote this, but we don't see all the years and all that goes into it nearly as much as I feel like we should.
You also have a podcast, not just this amazing book, To Mom is to Love. Tell us what you talk about in your podcast. What's the name of it? Where can we find it? All that stuff.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I have a podcast that I actually started before the book because I was told that I need to have a social media presence before I write a book. So I'm like, well, I guess I'll start a podcast. But I didn't know much about podcasting when I started it. And this was March of 2023.
Mm.
Actually, my husband knew all about podcasts and he was like, why don't you do it? So I will give him credit to starting that because if he did not help me learning all that stuff, I wouldn't have known anything about it. It's the same name, To Mom is to Love. That's always kind of been the same name, that part of it. At first, I had individual episodes. And then I decided to start interviewing guests, mental health experts, or people that really are doing things that are creating ripples in society, trailblazing, different pathways that I feel like we need to talk more about them. We need to create change in these ways. And it was something that I really enjoyed doing. I didn't know if I was going to like it, but like the people that I have met throughout that journey and the conversations I've had, I've learned so much. And I feel like there's something for everyone there. My personal paradigm shift was becoming a mom, but that isn't necessarily the case for whatever it is that other people have had paradigm shifts with. I really want to emphasize that it's not just for moms, it can be anyone. That is available, Jen, on all of the major platforms like Spotify, Google. I have it on YouTube, all that too.
I think that's great. It's great that you've incorporated guests. We do have a lot of value just on our own, but when you start branching out like this and getting other people's stories and perspectives, and you can apply it to your noun and verb, I love that part about what you're doing.
Thank you so much. You were my guest. I remember you talking about the backpack of life. And like, that was like, oh, that is so good. So,
Thanks.
yes, absolutely.
So I want to go back to your book for just a moment because I've seen you do some book signings and be part of book clubs and those sorts of things. What I think is interesting is, especially as moms, we tend to have sometimes this professional side where we have to be polished and we have to show up a certain way. And then we have this mom side where in your book, you've really put that out there where we just don't have to have that perfection. And so, how have you seen the way women relate to you and your story when it comes to that professional, polished versus just being myself and showing up however I am?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I am so, I guess, I don't know if passionate's the right word, but it is something that I've always felt because I remember growing up where there was this, we have to be perfect. But when we are not in public or on our professional side, then we can run wild with our emotions and we can yell and we can do whatever that is when we're not in public. I mean, I feel like my parents did the best they could with the tools they had. And that's not like what this is about to say, oh, my childhood was this. I just remember being frustrated with the fact that why is mom acting one way when we're around people and she's acting a different way when we're not? I just want mom to be normal. I don't like this perfect side. And it just was, and I don't think I really had the words back then, but I think I've always been so passionate about that because of the experiences that I've had with that. Also, at the same time, I mean, I still feel like we all do that. This is human nature. Like I'll say on my Instagram or whatever on the social media, I definitely will be posting more reels when I have my hair done and my makeup on, as opposed to when I'm not. So I think there is a basic thing about that. But at the same time, I think that, really knowing that the beauty is in the imperfection. The beauty is it trying. I wouldn't want a perfect mom, wouldn't want a perfect anything because then you wouldn't necessarily know how to, with the mom part of it, like how would you know what life is like if you had a perfect mom? How would you know how to
Yeah.
that disappointments and then with everything else, I was talking to my latest guest, Calvin Arsenault. We were talking about drawing a perfect picture. And it's like, what is even a perfect picture? Because your perfect picture may be completely different than my perfect picture. And when you look outside, there's different colors. It's not just solid colors, and we can color outside of the lines. That's where the growth lies. And I am so compassionate about that because when you're stiff and when you're perfect, you're
Mhm.
not growing. You're refusing to grow, I feel like. And you can see that with plants too. The plants that are stiff that can't move, they aren't getting as much sunlight and nourishment. The tomato vines will bend down, bend different ways to get to the light in some way. I think that is such an important message for us moms to know that it's okay to be you and it's okay to just put yourself out there because otherwise we're far too hard on ourselves. And I think it's a shame because we all are so beautiful and we have such beauty inside and out to share with the world. And I just wanted to see my mom do that growing up. I feel like the tools that she had at that point in time. So I want to show people these tools that they already have within themselves.
Yeah. And that generational shift, as you were talking, thinking about that generationally, how our parents and their parents growing up in the 20s and 30s versus growing up in the 80s, the difference of perception and where we started to really care so much about what everybody thought of us versus I feel like we're kind of getting away from that a little bit more with books like what you've put out and your podcast. And just like you said, I love the analysis of nature, which is living and breathing and doing all the things that we do as well, and sort of just looking at those and analyzing those next to one another. I did a devotional today and there was something on there and it was like, even the dead leaves are a new seed. It's representing that new seed of life, that newness. And so it's like, yeah, when you start looking at all the things around you, you realize that it all really does come together and there's so much to learn. So thanks for bringing that up as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm wondering how, after 5 years of writing your book and establishing your social media presence, how have you sort of had to slow down and listen to yourself as you enter into this next stage of Valerie and what you're going to be doing?
Mm. I think that's a great question because I don't know sometimes how to slow down, Jen. And we've talked about that. And I think it is kind of like sometimes going back to the cheerleader thing of knowing that sometimes we have to listen to ourselves, but also know that there is support around us. And I guess what I would say with that is for me, I think that I am always on the go with everything. For a lot of type A people, this is the case where it's like you want to do something, you want to accomplish it. And then it's like, what's the next thing? And what's the next thing? And it's okay to just pause. That's so hard to do. I think sometimes I've been trying to really be intentional about that for the past couple of years now. So let me try and cultivate the relationships that I have built over the past couple of years, but also reflect on what's next. And I think for writing my book, writing the podcast as well was a calling in the way that I knew that the time it was supposed to come out was almost like it had to come out at that time. There was just so many things where I would push back and be like, "Well, I don't know if it's ready." But then there would be something that was like, "Well, yep, this is the time now to do this." And I think honoring that in our lives, that sometimes there is a time to do that and other times it's just not yet. And knowing that there is that balance. And again, I think that nature gives us a great example of times of fruitfulness and times of rest and knowing that seasons change. I guess stay tuned for what's next. I want to continue to push out the message. And I think that's where it is, just planting these seeds and seeing what grows and where we go after that and helping lift up everyone, knowing that what they're doing is enough and just being perfectly imperfect.
That is key, just remembering that we set our own expectations too. That's something that's often difficult for people to break away from. We put all these expectations out there that we think everyone else has, and people are paying more attention to themselves than they are to us oftentimes. So it's just good to remember that.
Absolutely.
In your book, you invite readers to pioneer this new kind of motherhood. We have some people listening who are moms, maybe dads, maybe this is applicable all over. If you think about growth and what you hope to really impact others with, what's one practical evolution that you could maybe encourage moms or dads, anybody listening to adopt right now, maybe like in the next 30 days, that shifts from doing to being and really going from reaction to intentional love as a parent? I know that might be a deep question.
The pioneering word was very important to me because, well, one, I love history, but other than just that, I really identify with getting outside and going exploring. My parents have a lot of land where we'll take the kids sometimes. And when they were little, we would go out there a lot and I would go running in that area as well. Where there was a lot of brush, there was a lot of burrs, and they would stick to you. And then there were pointy sticks. There was all sorts of stuff getting in the way of your walk to get to your destination. But the more we trailblazed that path, the easier it became over time. And I really identified with that analogy with the brain, where there's neuroplasticity, there's neuron growth, where we have well worn pathways of maybe yelling or being anxious or whatever that is. And a lot of that's for survival purposes. I'm glad that I'm not thinking about why a bear is chasing me. I'm just reacting in that moment. But so much of the time, our amygdala, that fight or flight part of our brain, perceives false alarms and we'll take a highway, a really well worn path in our brain, and just go through it. Sometimes we have to stop and pause and say, I'm going to try a new path. I'm going to go through one that has a lot of sticks and it's uncomfortable. The more I try to do that, the more I can make that easier over time. I would say an actionable step with that is comparing it to exercise. The brain is not a muscle, but certainly so much of it does act in that same way. It has been proven scientifically that we are learning neuroplasticity, neurons are growing till the day we die. Like it doesn't stop in childhood. So pruning those neurons, taking new pathways, is like putting on your shoes to go for a walk or maybe push yourself just a bit more if you're running or riding a bike. You can't do a marathon overnight, but you can do a bit more each day and whatever that is. Everyone's different with what that is. And it's not a race, but it is like with my running and stuff, but doesn't necessarily have to be with running. But where it's like, okay, well, I walked a little bit more today. So let me run just maybe for 1 more minute or 2 more minutes. I'm starting to do another half marathon training. I started out with 1 mile and now I'm pretty comfortable at the 3 mile mark. So it's really just giving ourselves that grace. And that's with the brain as well. That's with yelling as well. That's with whatever it is that you are reacting to as opposed to responding to. Because I think we all have some type of reaction over response. And how can you choose a back road? How can you trailblaze a different back road? Sometimes it takes so that intentionality of, I'm going to choose gratitude in this moment when I'm yelling. What am I grateful for right now? I use an example in my book about a skunk that sprayed our dog. And I was so annoyed. But then I was like, well, I'm writing this book. So I guess I'm just going to stop right now and write 3 things I'm grateful for in this moment. And it almost was like that practice, that exercise. And then it gets easier over time.
I like the analogy of the skunk
Yeah.
because it's like the guy that you yelled at about being mindful. It's like, stop right now instead of give me 30 push-ups, give me 3 things you're grateful for. You're right, though, to retrain the brain and the neurological backup that we can do that. We can teach ourselves to respond differently. We can show up a better version of ourselves if we choose to do that versus continuing to just do what we know or what comes easy. I love that you bring that in because I think that not only are we thinking about parenting, but I always take it to the leadership space. That's where I spend a lot of my time. And I think that we may look at people in a certain light. Maybe it's our parents, maybe it's our boss. And we say, well, that's just how they are. And it's not fair to us to be treated a certain way, and it's not fair to them to continue to go down that same highway, right? We've got to tap into that and realize that we were created to change and to grow. And in order to grow, we have to change. And so, love those analogies and just that evolution as a parent, as a human, whatever it is that we're applying it to. So, thank you for that answer. I think it was spot on.
Thank you so
So,
much.
Valerie, we would love to maybe follow you on socials or listen to your podcast, read your book. Tell us where we can find all of those things. You did share the podcast, but where can we get the most of Valerie Probstfeld?
Thank you so much, Jen. Anyone who's listening can go to my website, tomomistolove.com, and you'll be able to access everything from there for my social media pages, as well as obtain my book, which is available on Amazon, both as ebook and paperback. I'm most active on social media on Instagram and LinkedIn, but I also have Facebook and YouTube.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Valerie. This has been wonderful to get inside the cover of your book and really just get to know you as a creator, you as a mom, you as a human, someone who knows a lot about the brain and how we function and how we grow. So, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing with our guests all your knowledge.
So much, Jen, for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.